Hi ladies, welcome back to the I've Decided challenge. Today is day 11 and today's a very special video, but first and foremost, go ahead and leave in the comments. I decided 10 days ago I am a healthy person. I decided 10 days ago I'm an expert at manifestation. I decided 10 days ago that I'm experiencing everything I desire right now. Leave your affirmations down below. And we get to share in the accountability. We get to create this sisterhood and this momentum all together, all of us participating in the challenge. I find it really exciting. It's very motivating for me to stick to my affirmations that way. I tend to have ADHD and my affirmations change all the time, all day long. But it's really good to be consistent with affirmations sometimes. I think it helps us to shift into that identity more effectively. I don't want to say more quickly necessarily. It really still depends on your limiting beliefs and your self-concept, but it's more effective to choose a handful of affirmations and really stick to those. So without further ado, if I ramble in this video, if my brain goes somewhere else, I don't know. It's just one of those days. Maybe I need to finish eating or go for a walk. But bear with me because today's lesson is very, very important, and it is a lesson I've been kind of waiting to touch on, waiting for the right moment. And I believe that today, the 11th day of this challenge, is a very special day to do that, which is why we don't need to know the how of manifesting. A lot of times when we find manifestation, when we come into it, we're raised in this logical perspective. Society is mostly logical, and logic has its place, okay? Touch the fire, you get burned, that's logic. But also sometimes logic can be overwhelming. Sometimes it can drive out faith, it can drive out spirituality. And part of this human experience is making room for both. So I'm a very logical person. I really love science. I really love data. I love analyzing data. I love how we can collect data from a large group of people and use that to interpret patterns in the rest of society. So like studies that we run and experiments that we run and test groups and focus groups and so on and so forth, like collecting this mass of data from people allows us to be more informed of where the collective is. And so one thing I do want to touch on before we get into like the depths of today's video is that we are all co-creating this experience. So because time is not linear, we're able to co-create, which means if I see someone on the street and I end up having a conversation with them, that conversation could very well be the reason that they feel inspired to make a decision. And here's actually a really good story of when this happened to me. I was in line at Starbucks waiting for my turn to order coffee, and I had heard these two girls in line talking about they wanted to take a year off of school and go travel and do these things. And I remember hearing that conversation, and I had been considering going back to school, and I had been considering pursuing my education. And I remember the way that it resonated with me. It was so synchronistic. And when we talk about synchronicity, and synchronistic experiences, what we're saying is I was already thinking that. I was already feeling that. I was already mentally in that space, and then you brought it up, so it feels like a coincidence. But once you open up to your spiritual senses, you don't see it as coincidence anymore. Coincidence is a product of logical thinking, whereas synchronicity is a perspective that is adopted by those of us who are spiritual. So I know now as a manifester, the reason that conversation came about was because that's what was on my brain. That's what was programmed into my focus. And the way that conversation hit me, if I had heard that conversation a day before or even a day later, maybe it wouldn't have affected my decision making at that time in my life the same way. And so that's why we don't say it's a coincidence. We say it's a manifestation. We say it's a synchronicity. And the same goes for how our reticular activating system works, where if you are looking into purchasing a vehicle. So like we have an SUV, and I remember when we first got it, I had no interest in that SUV before. I didn't really look at it. It didn't stand out in the sea of cars, in the ocean of cars that drive around all day. It didn't stand out to me. I didn't look at it as something special. I didn't look at it as something desirable. It was more my husband that picked out that car. But once we got the car, like my brain was spotting that car all around town. And now every time I get in it to drive, I'm like, oh, hey, there's another one. Oh, hey, there's another one. Oh, they're driving it too. Oh, look, there's a red one. Oh, that's a black one. It's like, it's because my focus shifted into that. And when we're manifesting, when we're manifesting, that focus is so crucial that it can sometimes be the very thing that's blocking us. And so what I mean by that is the real lesson here today is we're talking about why you don't need to know the how to manifest. The reason we don't have to figure out the how and we only have to figure out the what is because consciousness, in Islam we call it Allah, in Christianity and Catholicism they call it God, in Hebrew and Judaism they call it Yahweh, or they really will not even verbalize it the way that they believe it to be said or expressed. And we're all talking about the same thing. If you're not a religious person, if you're an atheist, you will call it your higher self, or you will call it source energy, or you will call it the universe. But ultimately, we're all talking about the same thing. We're all, as human beings, having this shared experience. And the reason you don't have to know how it manifests is because that part is up to consciousness to figure out. It's up to God to figure out. It's up to Allah to figure out. And how we know this is when we experience that synchronicity, it feels like, how could this happen? How could this coincidence have been set up? How could I be in this exact right place at this exact right time, having this exact mindset? Even you watching this video is a synchronicity, because you have to be in a mental space. You have to be in a spiritual space to be able to watch this far. We're 7 minutes, almost 8 minutes into this video. To be able to watch this far into this video, you have to be in the spiritual space to be receptive to what I'm saying, to be ready to hear what I'm saying. And whatever it is you're manifesting, whether that is health or wealth or relationships, you're hearing these words because this is part of your bridge of incidence. This is part of how God is unfolding things for you. This is part of how He is moving all the pieces exactly into the right place so that you get your manifestation. And this is why, if you're falling in love and you hear these stories like, oh, it happened when I least expected it, the reason it feels that way is because you weren't looking for how it was going to unfold. You weren't obsessing about how the money was going to come in, how you were going to meet this person, how the weight was going to come off of you, how you were going to overcome that medical issue. You weren't in your logical brain. When you have those synchronistic experiences, you're in your spiritual side. And so the more that we can trust that God really does have our back, He really is shifting our hearts and moving our feet in the right direction, because God, Allah, is experiencing Himself through us. Just like if you were to put on a pair of red tinted glasses, you would be experiencing the world through those red tinted glasses. He is experiencing the world through your lens, through your personality, through your vessel. We're containers. We are empty and meaningless without the life that consciousness gives us, which is why when you see a deceased person's body, you know the life in there is gone. You can see it, you feel it, you sense it. You can look at someone during a funeral and you just have this knowing of they're gone. They're gone. Even sometimes if you've ever been in a situation where someone is in a coma and they're considered brain dead, we call it brain dead, but what I see that as a spiritual person is their consciousness has left their body. The body is still able to be alive, but the body means nothing without our soul. And what is our soul? Our soul is from the divine. Our soul is the part of every human being. It's the part of this human experience that allows us to be conscious. And as long as you are alive and you are attached to your vessel, you are experiencing consciousness as yourself. And this is why you have to understand, some people debate manifestation as if it's shirk, as if you are giving yourself the credit that should be given to God, but God is living through you, so you are giving God the credit by recognizing the power he gave you. He didn't make you a powerless being. He gave you free will. He gave you discernment. He gave you morals and values. He gave you the capacity to love another human being and to care and provide for another human being. He gave you hands as tools to build and create. I mean, we see artists who can draw and paint and sculpt the most amazing things you'll ever see. We have people who, with their hands and their vision, tend to these beautiful gardens and plant all this variety of plants for us to enjoy. We have people who in the kitchen can take raw ingredients from this earth that has been provided to us and turn it into the most magical, sensational experiences. That's power, and that's not our power by ourselves without consciousness. That's not our power taking, like our ego taking credit for that. We all know, every expert, every master knows that their inner power comes from something bigger than themselves. I think we've all experienced a time where you're like, I don't even know how I figured that out, but I did. The reason you didn't know how you figured it out is because God figured it out through you. He didn't figure out for you. He doesn't answer your prayers for you. He doesn't teach you lessons for you, if that makes sense. He lives through you to teach you those lessons. He moves through you to build something. He acts through you. You are a channel for him. Consciousness, if you don't associate with God, that's fine. But understand that consciousness, and this is what I was coming back to what I was saying before, is people who think manifestation is a disbelief in God and a prioritization of ego and man's power. They don't understand God, and they don't understand like our energy comes from that. And if you're new to law of assumption or manifestation in general, but you've discovered Neville Goddard was considered an atheist because he didn't see God outside himself. But even any real believer shouldn't see God outside themselves, because when you know God and you understand God is living through you, so you're not separate. God is living through you watching this, and you're not separate from me because we're all connected. In the same way that if you had like a big ball of slime, right, and you're stretching the slime, it's still one unit. It's still cohesive. It doesn't ever break apart. We don't cut ourselves off from God to experience this life. We are God experiencing this life. And Neville, as an atheist who used the Bible in his teachings, who really, I don't believe he was an atheist. I do believe he believed in God, but he didn't believe in God in the literal sense that some people take religion and turn it into. But he believed in the spiritual God, which is consciousness. And he said, your imagination is God. What does he mean by that? He means if you are unconscious, if you're detached from your vessel, you don't have this imagination anymore. Your consciousness and your imagination, that's your link to God. That's the God part of you. The God part of you is not this vessel itself. The God part of you is not you on a cellular level, which is why when we are deceased, our physical cells stay here on earth, but our spiritual selves move on. And so not only was Neville, I believe, at the very least, a believer of the Bible and a believer of God as God actually is. But he was taught by Abdullah, and Abdullah was Jewish. Abdullah was an Ethiopian Jewish, I forget how I don't know what they call it, not a priest or a pastor, but his ranking was as a preacher, was as someone who was a teacher of Judaism. And even he knew God. He knew of consciousness as God, and taught Neville. And so all of us here, the reason we don't have to know the how is because our imagination is the link. It's connected to source. It is connected to the divine. It is the divine. It is the divine in you. It's contained in your vessel, which is why you have an identity. It's contained in your vessel, in your imagination, which we think of as being in our brains, which is why I am me, Aisha, and you are you watching. And we feel this sense of separation because our vision, our eyes, our ears, our senses, our physical vessels are saying, this is my body and this is your body. This is where I start and stop. This is my outline. This is the shape of me. And this is where you start and stop. And this is your outline. And this is the shape of you. But ultimately, and this is why when people get together, no matter what walk of life they're from, no matter how they were raised, no matter what their belief systems are, no matter where they're at in their life, human to human can always connect. We always have that power to connect. Even the people, if you're very devout and pious religiously, and there's someone who is completely atheist and they're very reckless with their lives and they commit crimes and they're on drugs and whatever, I guarantee you can sit those two people in a room and you will still be able to generate connection between those two people. There will still be a shared consciousness between those two people. Even if it takes many years to build that, may not always be instantaneous, but there's always something there. And what we have to understand as conscious creators, as conscious manifestors, is our job is to focus on what we desire, is to focus on how would that feel? How would it feel if my wish was already granted? How would it feel if my prayer was already answered? How would it feel if I gave myself permission to feel joyful and grateful and wonderful in this moment, knowing, trusting, having faith, having absolute submission to the God part of me, the God consciousness within me, that part of me is connected to the part that I think and see and am assuming is outside of me, the God that is moving through every human being all at once, all at the same time, indefinitely, making sure every manifestation, every prayer gets answered in exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, how it needs to best be experienced. And trusting that is the key to manifestation. Knowing you don't have to figure out the how, and this is why. Because God has already figured out the how, and you just have to let it happen. That part of your consciousness that is tapped in, it's plugged in. It's like when you need electricity, the electricity doesn't come from your wall. It comes from the wires in your wall that run outside to the power lines, and those power lines go all the way to a power plant. And that power plant is where the source of that electricity is coming from. It's just like that. So there is a source, and you're just plugged into it. And as long as you're living and breathing and you're alive and your eyes are open and you're awake and you're conscious, you're tapped into that God part of you. And even once the spiritual part of you transcends this body, you're still tapped in. You're never disconnected. You're not separate from God. God is in you, living as you. I know this is controversial, and I know it's a hot topic, and I know for some people watching, if you made it this far into the video, you're still not going to understand it. You're still not going to get it. It's still not going to resonate. But this is something that over time, you will start to see it. Over time, your eyes will be open, and this is why we say God in Islam. This is why we say Allah. closes the eyes and ears and hearts of the people he chooses. It's because if there's a part of you that the God part of you sees as not worthy, the God part of you cannot give you what you are not worthy of. Your consciousness cannot give you what you feel is unsafe. Your consciousness cannot give you what you feel you are undeserving of. Your consciousness cannot give you what you don't believe you can have. That's what that means, you know? And the more we can embrace that, the more we realize I get to steer the ship of this consciousness. That's my free will. That's the power that was given to me. That's my birthright. And the more you feel at peace with that power, the easier it gets to steer the ship. And whew, it's a beautiful thing. It's the most amazing part of this human experience, is recognizing we're building ourselves. We're building our life. We're so privileged to get to experience this. Thank you for watching. I'm so happy that everybody has joined me in these videos. Obviously today's a very heartfelt day. It's a very heavy topic. You might need to watch this again and really let it sink in. But I know that the people who are meant to hear it, the people who are ready to hear it, and the people who are ready to understand it are hearing me now, and for that I am forever grateful. So thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.